Okay, this is going to be a book review. I'm going to be talking about this book right here, Food and Behavior by Barbara Reed Stitt. It's very interesting. I'm going to go into more detail. I know I briefly mentioned this just yesterday, but I'm going to go into more detail today that I think you'll find interesting. It's useful information. It really is. Okay, so here it is, a paper. 102 misdemeanor probationers put into 4 groups. And the bottom line is the ones who were given nutritional counseling and instruction did far, far better. And that's kind of the point of this whole book. What she basically says, and she was a probation officer for like over 20 years, and she followed up her patients long term. She said the patients who had nutritional counseling did dramatically better. Like the risk of recurrence in 3 years was like over 70% for the regular parolees, probationers. But for her population, after long-term follow-up, I don't know the exact number, I think about 10 years, only 11% recurred. So she felt that food was the most important problem. Obviously, to me, you think about, is there a father involved in raising the child? Does the child have good role models? Who are the child's friends that they hang around with? All those things are real important. But so anyways, this is just, and there's a lot of papers like this. This is not just one paper. This whole book is full of case reports and information about studies along these lines. So, her overall take on diet is, I would kind of place her as sort of being a fan of the Mediterranean diet, which I think is basically stupid. But the Mediterranean diet is a dramatic improvement from what a lot of teenagers and young adults eat, okay? Here's a picture of her when she's 85 years old, Barbara Stitt. She was a probation officer, again, for over 20 years. Her husband, she married him a little later after she became famous for this. Her husband was a nutrition biochemist involved in making food, so he knew all about what was happening in the food industry. And let's see what else came here. So it brings up a couple terms. One is nutritional psychology, nutritional psychiatry. And they're actually, the real official phrase was ortho, meaning correct molecules, food, psychiatry, orthomolecular psychiatry. There's an entire journal of orthomolecular psychiatry. And you start drifting, though, a little bit into that orthomolecular health, and that gets you into Linus Pauling, and she's around that same era, the 1970s, all the Linus Pauling, vitamin C stuff, etc. And I would also say the cultural has a lot of effect on how kids believe. I talked about this before. Kids that go to the Catholic schools, they behave 1,000 times better than kids in the public schools. The education is just as stupid and worthless in a Catholic school as it is in a public school, but the behavior is 1,000 times better. There's also toxins in tap water besides the foods. Okay. Let's see what else. Now I'm going to go into a little more detail from the book. She herself had problems. When she's only 32 years of age, she was diagnosed with epilepsy. And the doctors recommend all these psych drugs for her. All she did was eat whole foods, sort of a whole food version of the Mediterranean diet. And she was cured. She never had problems with epilepsy seizures again. She also had a lot of volatile mood swings and, frequently going from happy to intensely sad and intense fatigue, lethargy. So once she fixed her diet, all this went away from her. And she realized that she had a major problem with rebound hypoglycemia. So if you eat a lot of sweets, then your blood sugar spikes, your pancreas overcompensates, thinks it's going to keep continuing all the sugar coming in. Let's say it's coming from a soda pop or something with no fiber. So then it drives your sugar down. That's rebound hypoglycemia. Then you eat more sweets to bring it back up, and you're going up and down all day. And also, anybody here listening to this, listen to me, we got a lot of experience with nutrition, so we can make sense of rebound hypoglycemia and solve the problem, okay? But a lot of these other people, they don't understand what's happening, and they're just clueless, and they live their life going in and out of rebound hypoglycemia. She felt that was the number one problem leading to criminal behavior. Okay, now don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of other things associated with criminal behavior. Okay, and I actually have some friends that have been in the business of handling criminal behavior. Okay, and there's a lot more to it. But she's still on to something good. All you got to do is fix a diet and you can get a dramatic improvement in people. That's a wonderful thing. And I think for the average person, they're sitting there thinking, well, so what? I'm not a probationer. What does it matter? Well, I would say is, for the average person, this is wonderful news as well. You can get better control of your behavior. So basically, the problem with all these probationers, they have out-of-control behavior. And it's interesting, Jordan Peterson said, what is psychiatric disease? He says, Most of the time, it's just a person who's overwhelmed. They've got more stress and complexity in their life than they're able to handle. So what am I saying here? What I'm saying is by optimizing your diet, you sort of activate your prefrontal cortex. You don't end up in a fight or flight, sympathetic autonomic nervous system mode of excessive adrenaline, excessive noradrenaline, excessive cortisol. The bottom line is you're more in control. You can choose your response to life situations better than just react emotionally and quite often foolishly. So she was convinced, because she had such a dramatic experience in her own personal life, that she then started doing this with all her probationers. She felt a brain allergy to caffeine. That's something I need to read more about, because this concept of brain allergies and food allergies causing behavioral change, I did not have much familiarity with that, but that's next on my list of things I need to try to study and understand better. There were some interesting things came out of this book. So this is a perfect example of, I read her book, and she if it wasn't for this book, she would have never written anything in her life. She's not some fancy literate person. She doesn't have some fancy erudite sense of humor. Her knowledge of nutrition is kind of rough around the corners. Her husband helped her a little, being a food biochemist, but still, it's sort of a Mediterranean diet. She thinks olive oil is okay and all that. So what I'm trying to say is, even if the author isn't that great of an author, but they've had a dramatic, incredible life experience, as she had, and her heart's in the right place and she wants to tell the truth, it's still a great book. This will be one of my all-time favorite books, even though it's got a lot of stupidity in it. So it doesn't matter. So a good heart and good experience can make a great book, even though, she's rough around the edges on the other stuff. Okay? Let's see, other things she points out is that corn, for example, is low in tryptophan. Meat has a lot of amino acids that compete with tryptophan for access on the transporters to get in to the brain across the blood-brain barrier. So she's saying that a diet of corn, like high fructose corn syrup, and meat leads to less tryptophan in the brain and less serotonin. Now, don't get me wrong. The single neurotransmitter theory is largely bogus, as talked about in psychiatry and the whole neurotransmitter theory of depression and whatnot and behavior and psychiatric disease. It's largely bogus, but there might be some component of usefulness to this. The other thing is tryptophan is used to make niacin and NAD, and the relevance of that is lack of niacin can lead to pellagra. Okay, and we think of pellagra with a rash, but pellagra can also be subclinical and lead to psychiatric symptoms: anxiety, headache, distractibility, forgetfulness, fatigue. Okay, and it even can mimic the symptoms to somewhat of schizophrenia. And there have been some papers of treatment of schizophrenia with niacin. I recently made a video about Dr. McDougall saying he thinks that schizophrenia is primarily an autoimmune disease, and there can be more than one path to schizophrenia. There's other people pretty well informed who say schizophrenia is sometimes due to gluten sensitivity. So certainly if I had a patient or a friend with schizophrenia, I would want to try to fix all this diet stuff as much as possible, see if that was enough to cure them. She said that the parolees that don't fix their diet, she said most of them will regress, over 70% of them. She said all of her probationers that actually followed her diet, she said none of them regressed. If they followed the diet, she said they would never regress. So that's impressive stuff. Part of it, though, is a built-in variable that anybody who's got the discipline to follow the diet is a person who's got the discipline to control their behavior. So that's another reason why they didn't have recidivism. Okay, almost all her probationers, she says, typically, teenagers and young adults, were junk food junkies, fast food junkies, often alcoholics, typical teenager diets, all this crap, soda pop, energy drinks, fast food, macaroni and cheese, Kool-Aid, donuts, candy, french fries, burgers, pizza, fried chicken, hot dogs, bologna, okay, all that kind of stuff. She did a full workup on her probationers. She would send them for a drug screen, a tox screen, including screens for heavy metals. They would check their blood, their urine, hair tests. She would check blood chemistries like for magnesium and other things, do an oral glucose tolerance test on them, run all these long questionnaires they had to fill out to see if they had symptoms of rebound hypoglycemia. And of course, they work them up for alcoholism, etc. Again, that's rather extraordinary. Here's the page number. Anyone who followed her diet, they never got in trouble again. Whereas the average recurrence rate was 70% in 3 years. Hers was 11% for her career. It's kind of extraordinary. She says the main problem with these probationers was rebound hypoglycemia. She emphasized that as being the number one biggest problem. So what I think is funny is she is as anti-simple sugars as it gets. And that creates a whole big fuss in, let's say, the nutrition community. You got people like Durian Ryder, the famous Durian Ryder bicycle runner guy who thinks simple sugars are great and we should eat more of them, okay? And you've also got other people like Victoria, nutrition expert, who likes sugar. You've got Kempner, who gave his patients simple sugars, okay? But those were patients there for other reasons who were having trouble maintaining their weight. All right, so I'm not going to get into everything. I made a previous long video about the whole fructose debate, and fructose is not the same thing. Well, sucrose is table sugar. That's white sugar. That's fructose and glucose. High fructose corn syrup can be 65% fructose. All right, so anyways, I'm not going to get into all that now. For me, this rebound hypoglycemia, I didn't realize it was so common. She said it's the number one cause of bad behavior, and that's based on 40 years of studying it. So that's an impressive statement. I don't think she's got any secondary gain. Okay, she's not making big money off this. She did become famous. She was on the front page of Wall Street Journal. She was on TV news back in the day. Like in the 1970s. All this stuff, but I don't get the money thing coming off of her. I think this is legit and true. Okay, I think she exaggerates the benefit of what she does. I think everybody does to some extent, but I think this is legit. Okay, that it is a big benefit. Not quite as much as she says, but still a big benefit, and that's highly valuable. She said alcoholism was very common, and most of the alcoholics also had trouble with hypoglycemia. She said food allergies can cause lethargy, paranoia, agitation, rage, seizures. They're a much bigger deal than I had realized, according to her, but I think she might be right because I've heard other people say that and I always ignored them. She said it can be to common foods, milk, wheat, corn. That's why this brings out the value of doing an elimination diet. She said if she get a probationer to do an elimination diet, they would see that it had helped them, and that'd be one way to get them to stick with the diet long term. She talked about a lack of nutrients. In processed food, they take all the nutrients out. They might throw back a little bit of stuff, but it's not of much value. And so they're deficient in things, including potentially niacin. She talked about excitotoxins, things like the effect of caffeine, aspartame, MSG, MFG. I've given other lectures on all that stuff. And also other toxins, including heavy metals. She did talk a little bit as well about excitotoxins, I just mentioned excitotoxins, and of course the other toxins, the lead a lot of them had lead exposure and stuff, but that was back in the day when there was lead in the gasoline. Lead intoxication was more common in those days. But overall, she's very, very anti-sugar, which I think is a little bit interesting. Okay, this is just more stuff about things. And then there's a note. I make notes to myself, things I got to read. So I hope you found it interesting. I certainly found it interesting, and it's an opportunity to help people and to help yourself. So I hope it was useful.